Over the last 25 years since the South African first democratic elections, the country has gone from a first world country to a third world country. The deployment of individuals that know very little of business are placed in positions that they know very little of has led to a steady decline in the effectiveness of the entities. These individuals find innovative ways to pillage the coffers of companies and especially state-owned enterprises. Officials in the government would abuse their positions to their own advantage and run the state coffers dry till the next lot of taxes are collected to support their lifestyles. When tenders are advertised, the bribing starts, and it is usually the biggest bribe that win the tender, and the experience of the company that won the tender has very little to do with the awarding of said tender. For this reason many of the projects fail because of the lack of expertise to complete these tender contracts, and it can have fatal consequences, not for the comrades that received the bribes and awarded the tenders, but the general public. Many of the projects that the government is involved with are of substandard quality because the inspectors that are supposed to ensure regulations are maintained are deployed that know very little or have limited experience in the relevant field. So a bribe would be in order to ensure certification. Even after receiving complaints from those that reside or work in these substandard environments, nothing will be done till it is too late to remedy the issues, and the project would need to be scrapped so that a new tender can be made available to those that are willing to bribe the officials in charge. But the bribes that are paid are not always in the form of cash, although cash is king. But there are many forms of corruption happening, from companies paying for luxury vacations abroad to expensive wines and spirits for events hosted by the relevant parties. It would seem that any form of bribery would get you the business of government as long as your pockets are deep and willing. But in recent days some of these corruptees' names were exposed at a commission to find out more about state capture. Now the corruptors are starting to speak out and naming names. But what will happen to the individuals that were named in these commissions? Your guess is as good as mine. But on the other hand, that we need to look at the tax fraud that takes place on a daily basis by these corrupt individuals. Or do your party membership card give you automated amnesty from prosecution? None of these benefits are ever taxed as required by the Revenue Services law of the country. There is also the contravention of the Exchange Control Act by government and other officials, where these bribery funds are placed outside of the country without the authorization from the Reserve Bank that are in charge of maintaining the currency and the international flow of money in and out of the country. But how could these corrupt government officials get funds out of the country without the correct declarations being filed with the relevant authorities? One of the suggested ways is by utilizing all the government official international travels and the use of diplomatic pouches that are not subject to search by outgoing and incoming custom officials. Through these methods, these diplomatic missions could become a major route of ill-gotten gains by politicians. Another way is by keeping donations from other countries for the upliftment of the local people outside of the country in shadow accounts that are only accessible by certain government officials. These donations are then transferred from these shadow accounts to personal accounts outside the country's borders for use when these officials need to flee the country due to their non-delivery to the masses in need. When an international company wants to get in on the action in the country through governmental contracts, in many cases, bribe monies are paid into international-based accounts so that the funds never reach the country's shores, and the individuals will also not be liable to pay tax on these illicit funds. There are many ways that government officials can either get funds out of the country or have the funds never reach the borders of the country in the first place. How many of your government officials own homes in countries other than those within your borders? Will there be prosecutions of these individuals for tax evasion and corruption? Corruption happens all over the world and in most governments around the world. It is not just the corruption that impedes the economies of these countries, it is also the abuse by elected and appointed officials of government resources that are meant to serve the people. These people steal not from the government, but from the people. They should be held liable for every dime that is lost to the country's economy. Those that facilitate these illegal transactions should also be prosecuted, and every dime that they gained and placed in accounts outside the borders of the country should be confiscated and returned to the rightful owners of these funds, the people. The abuse of tax funds by political parties all over the world is well known, Yet nothing is being done about this major problem. Some of these elaborate events hosted by parties like the African National Congress of South Africa are alleged to be funded by the taxpayers. Take a look at these parties' financial statements. If you can find them, you will notice that they are basically bankrupt and should not be able to host these events. But still they go ahead and throw party event after party event, and the question that we need to ask is, from the public side, where is the funds coming from to pay for these events? Exorbitant amounts of funds are being paid by the taxpayers to the protection details of some of these so-called leaders to protect them, because they do not deliver on their promises made during the run-up to elections. These political affiliates travel many times by military air transport that cost taxpayers millions every year, but these individuals do not care. They think that their positions in society entitle them to misuse state resources as they please, because there is very little that the man on the street can do. In conclusion to this discussion, it would seem that if you are part of the ruling class, you are basically immune to criminal incineration, while the man on the street will be charged at the speed of lightning if he or she breaks the country's laws in any way at all. So if you want to get immunity from criminal prosecution for your criminal acts, join the ruling political party and work your way up the ranks so that you can also become an elitist.